Hello and welcome all. We are really glad you decided to join this webinar. I am Talia Khatsor and I will be moderating this webinar today on the topic of schooling during COVID lockdown and beyond. And first, I want to thank the IPA for hosting these webinars that I know have been so helpful to so many. And I also want to thank the very wonderful, thoughtful educators and a psychoanalyst that have come together to think about this difficult topic. As a result of the pandemic, we know we are living through extraordinary times. Reality and expectations of how we move in it has shifted drastically and rattled us all in deep ways. If reality is like our body, at times we don't know where our head is, where our limbs are, and how to move through space. We are all anxious and lost. And one area where this has been felt deeply is schools, learning, and families. Boundaries between schools, family life, and work have been blurred. Teachers, parents, and children are being asked to perform impossible tasks and are feeling taxed beyond their limits. And there are serious issues of lack of basics need and the shift to online learning and its complexities, and the loss of body contact and physical shared place and space, and I can name so many more. So we have gathered here today to think about this major crisis. Our hope is that this will provide a forum, one among many others, to bring our heads together to better understand this difficult new reality and its demands on learning families and children and parents and teachers' emotional life, and how to support and provide, how to provide emotional support. Freud introduced the idea that one of the first functions of the mother, we would say the parents today, is to provide a protective shield against overwhelming stimulation, anxieties, and impairments. We have all experienced the precariousness and the breakdown of the protective shield. Hopefully, this conversation between us, along the participation of the audience, will bring a bit of a sense of the capacity to rebuild the protective shield through minds coming to think together. So before handing over the presentation to our panelists, I will explain briefly the format of how this webinar is going to function. So we have two sections. In the first section, each of our three panelists will give a short presentation. In the second section, is about questions and answers and devoted to the free exchange of selected questions and ideas with the panelists and the attendees. I just want to clarify that first we will have a short period where our panelists will be discussing among themselves after they present, and then we will go into the questions from the audience. So you will find a box entitled questions on the right side of the screen. If you would like to ask a question, please write it in this box. You can post your question throughout the whole course of the webinar from the very beginning. And please remember that questions will not be answered until after all three presentations and a short discussion between the panelists have been completed. So now we are ready to begin. And before handing over to each panelist, I will introduce each one of them. Our first presenter is Jacqueline Marks. Jacqueline Marks is the Senior Director of Early Childhood at the Manny Cantor Center of Educational Alliance. Jacqueline has built a nurturing and inclusive preschool nestled within a downtown community center, and under her leadership, the school has grown to include 250 children ages 0 to 5. and she has pioneered a blended funding model combining tuition and Head Start funds to serve family across the socio-economic spectrum. So, Jacqueline, please, and thank you.
Thank you, Talia, for that introduction. Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this conversation. This is indeed such a complicated time right now, and I'm glad to be in dialogue with you all here today. As a way to begin, I wanted to start by sharing a bit about our context, which frames our work and the community that we serve. The Manning Cantor Center is a vibrant community center located on the Lower East Side of New York City. For many months, as you all know, New York was the epicenter of the pandemic, and we all held and continue to hold much fear and anxiety about our health and safety. Our school is situated in a diverse neighborhood, and we've created a unique model. As Talia described, it blends funding from federal Head Start, the New York City Department of Education, tuition, and also private philanthropy, which allows us to serve families across the socioeconomic spectrum. This allows our school to become a beautiful mix of racial, linguistic, cultural, and socioeconomic diversity. In turn, this means that our families have a variety of needs that are very specific to their own circumstances. So early on in the pandemic, our early childhood center was faced with a pretty big question. How do we deliver a high quality early childhood program where we continue to center ourselves in relationship and connection to one another? How can we do this when we cannot physically be together anymore, and when early childhood and remote learning are not at all analogous? And so that was quite a big problem, I think, that many schools face, and early childhood centers specifically. And for us, one of the first things we needed to do was to ensure that all families and teachers were set up with the technology and capacity to begin to connect virtually. So for us, this included ensuring that people had laptops or iPads and Wi-Fi service. And then from there, we began to build a variety of ways for us all to remain connected and supportive to one another. Our teachers began and continued daily online morning meetings as a way to provide synchronous learning, so learning and connection of those at the same time and together. Our teachers also offer daily provocations, so ideas and opportunities for families to try at home. And then in response, families will post photos or anecdotes of their adventures or things that they've tried at home. And that's called asynchronous learning, learning that children are doing on their own in their own homes, and then connecting that back to the culture and community of the classroom. Our teachers also mail notes and packages to children's homes. Our teachers make weekly phone calls with families to check in. And we have a social work team who facilitates weekly support groups on Zoom and also individual phone calls with families. We have many families who struggle with basic needs and having their basic needs met. So we've partnered with Rethink Food, which is a program that developed something called Common Table, which is a meal delivery service that connects families to local restaurants that had been closed due to the pandemic. And they began to deliver meals 4 days a week at no cost to the families. And we were able to enroll 80 people in that pilot. We've also distributed cash grants to families to help support their basic needs, and we have bi-monthly supply pickups at our school for diapers and wipes. So alongside all of this work, we also see families, or we continue to see families who are at home with their children and struggling to meet basic needs. They're working from home or trying to access public benefits because they're no longer working, jumping through hoops, and it seems, at least here in the United States, that there's no safety net in sight. On our side, we've been able to reach all of our families and provide some amount of connection and support over this time, but I do want to note and continue to acknowledge that there is a daily struggle that continues for each of our families. Alongside of this, as a school, we've recently received guidance from city and state authorities that a September opening for us seems likely. So we've now pivoted or added on a new part of our work, which is working towards reopening and planning for September. For us, this will likely be a blended learning model that includes both in-person and online connections for children, families, and teachers. We're engaging with local pediatric physicians that are helping us create and adjust and readjust our reopening plans. And then we expect that these plans will be modified and again readjusted as new information comes out. I'm interested in hearing what has worked for others, what has been less successful, and how you, Nell, and Minnie have been able to engage with families, particularly when the digital medium, the digital platform itself is so flawed as a way of connecting with young children. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacqueline. And now we will move to our next presenter, Nell Nicholson. Nell Nicholson has been a teacher since 1992 in London. She worked in inner city mainstream school learning, and she's currently the head teacher of Gloucester House, the Tavistock Children Day Unit and Outreach Service. She has been in post since 2005 and has passion and commitment for education and mental health collaborations to support the development of children with complex and severe social, emotional, and mental health difficulties. Nell, thank you.
Thank you, Talia, and good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending on where you are in the world. Firstly, I'd like to say that I'm really thrilled to be invited to participate in this webinar. A really wonderful opportunity to think with international colleagues about the challenges and opportunities we face. I'm interested in thinking together and understanding which of these are common to us all and those that may be unique to our local contexts. Of course, though this is a crisis that affects us all, the ebb and flow of the virus hits crisis peak and recovery at different times. Here in London, we are now theoretically in the recovery phase. Shops, restaurants and hotels are opening, and there's an expectation that all children return to school in September after the school holidays, and the new normal is apparently emerging. However, whilst this is the case, in parts of the UK, even very close to us in London, outbreaks are reported and areas are having to swiftly return to lockdown or delay recovery. The impact of this level of uncertainty and alertness to being ready for a crisis is not to be underestimated. High levels of cortisol are needed to manage crisis, but how is this affecting mental acuity, our sharpness and wellness? Feelings of brain fog, fatigue and dullness, sleep disruption, stress and anxiety? Is it the exhaustion of Zoom and online contact in which one cannot hear the breath or read the emotional body language fully? Or is it a more general stress response to these times of extraordinary uncertainty? Schools in the UK have actually been open throughout the crisis to vulnerable children and children of key workers. I think this is a really important fact. The unique context for different children means that some children and staff have been attending school throughout the long weeks of lockdown with no break whatsoever, even during school holidays, whilst others have been at home learning on Zoom, and for others there's been very little contact with school, just a few bits of work being uploaded onto web platforms. The main education in those cases is provided by frazzled parents some of them trying to work and teach children. For sure, the important question of structure and boundaries has affected us all. Has the teacher become the caregiver, providing food parcels and respite for the vulnerable? Have the parents become the teachers, trying to grapple with phonics and how to keep children interested in education? We've all needed to adapt to online ways of working. In our service, we've been working therapeutically and educationally online because we're a combined mental health and education service. For some of our children, this has been pretty much their only contact, and others have continued to come to school for most of the crisis. Staff and our families have really risen to the challenge, to our hybrid service with some children in school, some children at home, and the staff on a rotation across the two aspects of the service. Some of our children, surprisingly, have actually responded really well to the Zoom contact. They've been grateful for the lessons and have been more focused without the distraction of their peers. However, for others, they've not engaged with it at all. And the best we've been able to do for some of them, if the parents have been worried about sending them into school, is to keep in regular contact with the parents and carers daily and try and send suggested timetables to keep the children in a routine. Some children have been terrified of the virus and won't come out of their rooms. And for others, it's as if it doesn't exist and they're really perplexed by physical social distancing and want to come close. When the official return to school day started on the 1st of June in England, there were images of children returning to school playgrounds to be greeted by staff in full PPE, ready to take their temperature. I wondered what memories these sorts of experiences will tattoo on the minds of the next generation. I have in my mind a knowledge that this virus will have very different impacts on different individuals and on communities. I think of moments when we reopened our doors after the initial peak and children coming in balking against the bright light because they'd been shut in a dark room with their computers, and others putting measuring tape to ensure that we kept 2 meters away. And a rather poignant moment with a teacher when she asked a child to move up a bench they were sitting on to keep social distance, and he went to the other side of the playground, unable to manage not being allowed to sit close to his teacher. As leaders in education, we're juggling the anxiety of parents, children and staff. We need to contain, encourage and reassure. We need to balance the real threat and the perceived threat so that people operate safely, but also with hope, resilience and the capacity to move forward. When the peak really hit in London, we operated almost entirely remotely. And then most of our staff were then apprehensive to come back in April. But now they're all saying it's the part of the work they prefer. On a personal level, as a head teacher, trying to manage the uncertainty and make balanced decisions about how to work in everyone's best interest continues to be a major challenge. But also, as well as it being a singularly challenging time, it's also been a really inspiring time. The human capacity to adapt and change. In a staff survey we conducted, comments ranged from staff noting the monotony, it feels never ending, the lack of boundaries, it can be difficult to find a quiet room at home, the barriers to emotional contact, it can be difficult to connect online, the lack of structure, time can feel disjointed, but also the inspiration arising from our ability to adapt, change and rise to the challenge. People saying things like, I'm proud and impressed with how we've adapted. And from a very junior member of staff, I've learned to be more of a leader and have greater confidence in my ability. And also for some, the increased opportunity for partnership. Some comments on working more as a team with parents and carers. And in school, the difficulty of remembering. It's difficult to observe social distancing. I hope from this experience, we will be able to retain and hold on to the new adaptations that may be useful. The holistic education of the whole child, for example, and more personalised approaches to the learning journey, which they're now talking about in mainstream schools more. The phrase, never waste a good crisis, comes to mind. After all, calm seas don't make good sailors, and perhaps some of what we are learning now will be the seeds we cast to populate new forests.
Oops, sorry. Our next, thank you so much, Nell. Our next presenter I just need a slide one. Oh, okay, sorry, I have it. Our next presenter is Minnie Dastur. Minnie is a Tavistock trained child psychotherapist, a training analyst, adult and child, with the Mumbai chapter of the Indian Psychoanalytic Society and a member of the IPA China Committee. She is also the course organizer for the Child Psychoanalytic Psychotherapy run by their Mumbai chapter. Minnie, thank you.
Thank you, Talia. And I'm so glad to have an opportunity to meet Jacqueline and Nell. And for everybody out there, hoping for better times ahead for us all soon. So I read my paper. The mushroom cloud that spread over the world with the explosion of the COVID-19 pandemic has infiltrated deep into every familiar system of working, relating, and living. A pillar of our civilization, schooling, is struggling to reinvent itself. The physical presence of a teacher, of classmates, and the alma mater has been taken away. There is this joke about a teacher taking a class roll call. Corona Shah, present Miss. COVID Patel, present Miss. Social distancing, present Miss. Shah, Patel, and Singh are common Indian surnames. The pandemic has imprinted itself on the identity of every child and adult. The invisible virus threatens not only our own personal continuity of being, but a break in the continuity being of our world as we know it. There has been a tear in the fabric of our social existence and connectedness. The children are the most vulnerable at this stage, subject to their own uncontainable anxieties and those projected into them by their peers. The fears of the pandemic can morph with fears from the past, repressed and residing deep within our psyche, creating a confusion between reality and fantasy. These fears shut down thinking and impede learning. The analyst can provide a thinking space so that these fears do not remain nameless dreads. Will this impact be carried over by the children of today to their children of tomorrow, a generational transmission? As psychoanalysts, we need to recognize the impact of this apocalypse on our multiple social identities and cultures. How can we assist schooling through working with all three entities involved, teacher, child, and parent? Uzel describes the family envelope as the process of structural stabilization that takes place within the family, and then the habitat, its belonging, connectedness, and compactness. When families are facing enormous disturbances, emotional instabilities, the tear in the family envelope floods these anxieties into every aspect of life. Mumbai is a city with huge socioeconomic disparities. The elite schools have equipped themselves with all the facilities to provide online learning. The children too have access to the latest technology as well as well-educated parents. The teacher and child have had to come together to keep the curriculum going. There are difficulties of frustration, connectivity on net and in the mind, claustrophobia, and an uncertain future. But on the other side of the socioeconomic divide, the lockdown that ensued has had a disastrous impact. People have lost their jobs, with industries shutting down. It is impossible to have social distancing for families living in tightly squeezed spaces. Yet, social distancing is an important way of keeping yourself safe. How do they deal with this conflicting situation? Hatred and violence is increased by failure and the feeling of utter helplessness. The desire to know is replaced by the desire not to know. You lash out where you can when you have no way to fight what you cannot see, touch, or understand. The children lose the security of the adults around, and the home becomes a threatening place. One young girl spent all her saved up money to buy liquor for her alcoholic father so that he would quieten down and not beat her up. The Mumbai chapter of the Indian Psychoanalytic Society has been working in schools on both sides of the divide. Most of our work is with schools for the low-income groups. When a child is in trouble, the main hurdle is to get parents and teachers to give more attention to the psychological difficulties that hamper not only learning, but the child's very character of life. However, they measure the effectivity of the therapy by the report card. For us, it is a byproduct of a more integrated ego. With the limited living space and equipment, it is a challenge for us to reach the child. Through talking with the teachers and making them aware of the child's emotional difficulties, we have been able to make them understand the crying need of the child over and above his academic need. But with parents, it has not been easy. There is this young boy in therapy whose play is all about dismembering dolls, breaking and stamping on his toys. His play box is filled with debris, and yet the parents complain that he's not studying and is unmanageable at home. He can be the future dawn of this community. In the therapy, there have been some small steps towards reparation and connectivity. How do we hold on to that and not lose all the ground won? The parents do not pick up the call of the therapist. Teachers feel frustrated with this ineducable child. Our challenge is to work with all three, child, parent, and teacher. We need to move out of the box of the one-on-one in-room relationship to perform the function of mirroring and holding the anxieties of all three, collectively and individually. Joining up with a teacher and making a combined program may be of great help in both of us being able to reach these children. Maybe the children can be asked to draw, write some notes, send this directly to teachers and therapists. Work is being done on WhatsApp, which most children are quite adept at. This can create a space which can be private and yet be shared. The most important factor at this time for us is to maintain connectivity. To give these children a sense of worth and not feel marginalized, we all need a leap of faith to leave our familiar known ways of working. Parents and the school need to understand that we are important partners in the process of learning. For the children to experience that there is an other that can bear witness and have witness alongside of what they're going through. We need beyond negative capability to know that we do not know and adapt as best as we can to this situation. Thanks.
Thank you so much, all three of you. I have known what you were going to say from before, and hearing you say it now has been very moving, because we have to grasp it again and again, the immensity of what is it that families and schools and us, all of us in our professional roles are going through. So I was very moved, and I know we already have important questions from the audience. But before we go to that, I wanted to have a bit of a conversation among us, because I know you have questions to each other. And maybe let me just start that with one question that I have in my mind, but I know maybe all of you have it, of course. So I think that one important question is to maybe have more of an idea of what you have been seeing in terms of children's emotional struggles and needs, and how they're being responded to by educators and parents, by clinicians. I know, Nell, you were mentioning a bit of the different reactions, the phobia on the one hand and the manic defense on the other hand, and also this confusion about the teacher is the parent and the parent is the teacher, and there is so much that they all have to take in terms of worries and anxieties, and how they are asking that and manifesting that. Of course, I'm thinking also of my patients. All of us are thinking of either our students or patients or parents, and of the many parents who come to us and ask us about their children regressed behaviors and their own very unsettling emotional life right now. So let me bring that at first, and maybe whoever one of you want to start, this is now a free flowing, so you can jump in. And we are all unmuted, I believe, and we will have a conversation now.
I think because we work with children who already have very significant social, emotional, and mental health difficulties, we're quite attuned to the different sorts of responses that might come our way. But I was really struck, as I said, for 2 weeks we closed and just had everything online. And that first day when some of the children came back, and they came with their masks and they came with their gloves on, and they looked really worried at first. But they quickly adjusted into something more ordinary. But it's quite hard to for it not to be extreme one way or the other. So either there's no virus and everything should be the way it was before, or they're very, very frightened and staying in their rooms, refusing to come out, and not able to engage at all. But also from sort of more ordinary children in more ordinary settings, I think seeing increased anxiety in them is quite marked. Certainly my brother's children, who he's really worried that they've really regressed at home, and that one of them is now really gone into her shell and was already shy at school, and the other one keeps talking about the virus and what can we do when the virus isn't here. So it's difficult to know yet what the impact's going to be long term.
On our end, I think we're still in our homes and in our individual spaces, and by the time we go back to school, actually, it will have been at least 6 months. If in fact schools open in September, it will be at least 6 months that we've all been separated from one another. And so right now, what children and families continue to experience is a sense of isolation, and the regressive behaviors, I think, that both Talia and Nell you're describing in young children are very, very primal. So what we're hearing from families and seeing are behaviors like biting and physical aggression and potty training accidents that children had worked through many years before, and things of that nature. And we expect that that will continue, and that will make its way also into the classroom. For us right now, our work is rooted a lot in the social emotional understanding and awareness of what children are experiencing, what families are experiencing, and how we as educators can bring that lens to the school when we reopen. So how do we allow space for children to bring these emotions, to bring these behaviors, and be greeted actually where they're at, with a teacher, a caregiver in partnership, because how they're feeling and what they're experiencing is real. And it is our role as educators to then understand that and build curriculum and relationship and dialogue from where they're at now. So not to change it, but to know it exists, to value it, to respect it, and to then provide support from there.
Minnie, maybe.
Yes. You see, as you said, Talia, it's a tale of two cities. There's some end which is absolutely in denial because they have no means of protecting themselves. They're really all herded into containment zones. They can't get out. They will keep on infecting themselves. And there's been thereby some kind of total disregard for institutions, for establishments, because they feel not cared for. They feel all rounded up and put in in a place and not allowed to go out. This is transmitted from parents to children, and often we see videos that are taken where the children are just running around in those tiny narrow lanes. Nobody has a mask. Nobody does any kind of, it's impossible for social distancing. And almost there's a disregard for learning. It's almost as if they have sort of rebelled against this kind of establishment, which doesn't seem to have space for them. Because on the other hand, they see everybody in cars and in homes and in all the rest of it that is happening. It's a wide discrepancy. And our work is with teaching those children and how we get through the parents to support us. It's very difficult for the parent to think about a therapist. Therefore, I've been thinking whether we need to have some kind of, maybe Nell and Jacqueline, whether you have experiences of therapists and teachers getting together to somehow access inaccessible families and inaccessible children.
We definitely have been doing that for one of the families that I was thinking about earlier, a boy who's basically shut himself in his room and wouldn't come out and wouldn't do any. He lives with his father and his grandmother, and in the end, the therapist is the psychotherapist and the teacher have been together meeting with the parents on Zoom, and then we've been talking to the child on the phone, and slowly he's started to engage a bit more. We have done quite a lot of that kind of thing.
We've been holding that as well. I think for us, in our initial conversations with families, or in our work with children, our view at this point has really shifted. I mean, we always knew and understood the role and the importance of the family, but at this period of time, our work really has shifted to being primarily with the families, to providing the families with the support and the tools they need to then be in this role that Nell described, you know, teachers as coaches for families, actually, and families not just as caregivers, but also as teachers. And this is all to say that in our initial conversations with families that our teachers and our social work team had with families, at the surface level, the conversations went something like this: how are you doing? And then families saying, we're doing great, or we're okay, as a way to end the conversation or close the type of support that could be offered. And what we found is that it was through a different type of interaction that then allowed us entry. So we then began some of this basic needs work. So things like giving out diapers, wipes, food, supplies, basic things like that, that then families just arrived and began opening up about what was actually going on in their home or what struggles they're actually having, that then gave our team, our teachers and our social workers, more access and awareness to the specific needs of what was happening, that then allowed for a sense of trust, rather than this fear of gotcha, or what's happening in your house, we're here to, you know, eradicate whatever that is. That's not our goal. That's not our role. Our role is to just be here to witness this together and to provide any support that a family feels that they need. I know that your setting is much more extreme, Minnie, so I wonder if any of this feels like it could be doable for you.
So the thing is that as psychoanalysts or as therapists, we've been used to, and you would also be used to, working in room. You would have a therapist at least in a corner of a room with a child. Now this has become almost impossible. Now, if the question now is that if we stick to our analytical roles or to the analytical setting, we will lose the child. So do we step out? Do we then engage the help of teachers? Do we get a new media? Because many children don't have the apparatus, they don't have the devices. So smartphones are about probably the only access. And maybe we need to reinvent ourselves till we can get back, till we can recover and use both legs, so to say, in analysis.
I think this is a really important point, and because I run a school in a mental health setting, which is it's a therapeutic environment with what we call a therapeutic milieu. So we always have a mind on what might be the meaning of a behaviour, for example. But for us psychotherapists who come to work at Gloucester House, they always need to work in a slightly more applied way because of the context. And I guess it's about trying to find the kind of boundary of what's really important that the teacher holds on to and the psychotherapist holds on to, but where there is room for partnership, because you're right, you don't want to lose the children in this difficult time whilst they're at home. But for some of the children who are having therapy online, I think it's very difficult for the children, and it's difficult for the parents actually too, because that boundary isn't there. And whilst it is a short-term measure, I think we're aiming to get the actual face-to-face therapy back face-to-face as soon as we can, because it is much more complicated in someone's home. I agree with you.
I want to add, this is such an important conversation, and I want to add that we are facing such a crisis that has to do with what happened physically, and also the physical and the emotional getting blurred together. And what it makes me think of Melanie Klein and what she says about how for the baby, satisfying the pangs of hunger is not separated from the satisfying of the emotional needs and the relief of anxiety. And we are back in that place where, as you said, Jacqueline, thinking about the basic needs is a way right now to have an entrance into what is happening emotionally, and you cannot separate both. And probably, I mean, the wrenching reality of India is really quite upsetting for all professionals. I'm thinking how hard it is for any one of us to think clearly what is to do professionally. So if it is hard for us, can we imagine what is it like for vulnerable families? Of course, this is, and the basic needs really have to be addressed before you can think how to come into the most complicated places. Maybe I will throw a question. So let me throw a question from the audience here. So just so you would know, I'm going to look at my phone, and it's not that I'm texting to my friends. I'm just getting the questions by in this way. So it's interesting because the questions are really exactly what you are all talking about, and I think I will like to start bringing these questions up, and for each one of you to pick it up. So, you know, listen, this is what we've been talking about. Maybe you can add more to it. But how do we help children with special needs? This is very hard. It's extremely difficult to connect with them via the online virtual classes. Parents are experiencing burnout and finding it difficult with the current situation. Children are very distracted, low attention span, irritability, frustration, and of course their screen time. Their screen time has also increased, and this has been causing so much disturbances. So we hear about this all the time. And I'm thinking from all, what would you want to say about it? And how are you thinking about it? How are you thinking of helping? I mean, I know with young kids, it's quite extreme. And so this is one question.
Yeah, I'd be happy to start with that one. I think children's behavior tells us something. So a child not wanting to interact with a screen or walking away, or what is quote unquote seeming distracted about something that's happening, they're then telling us that that's not the right medium for them, that they need a different way, a different space, a different avenue to access content, relationship, connection, basic needs, any of those things. And so I think, and this relates back to what you were saying, Minnie, also, is that that's then our role as educators in this moment of needing to reinvent ourselves, needing to reinvent what it is and how we interact with children. For us, that's been through the families. And so if in fact this platform isn't working for children, how do we then give families the tools that they need to engage with their children, or understanding or hearing from families what's working or what's not working for them already? Because in most cases, not in most cases, in all cases, families know their children best. And for us, it's knowing and understanding that and trusting families and the family's role in this relationship and partnership, and using that as our framework to then create a plan or a path for each individual child.
And of course, that for that you have to have such a good connection, right? I think you were bringing connectivity. I mean, we are all talking about how do we stay connected, and how do we stay connected to our families, to our patients, to our students, and that of course is sitting on trust and on a feeling that, I mean, I think what you're saying, which is so important, is that families knowing you are there for them is more important than if if the kid is sitting and singing the song at a time or doing whatever task. So connectivity is such an important piece.
One of the ideas I had, and it's not a psychoanalytic idea, but in a way for us to think how we can keep the connectivity, how we can reach, particularly, and I'm not talking about parents who are very well educated, who are wealthy, who have all the access and so on. I'm talking about the ones that really need it. And the future of our society depends on a large section of these kind of people and these kind of children, and what they will carry from this trauma and how it will affect their future lives. One of the ways I thought of was that we could make it, as it is sometimes there is only one device. Whether, Jacqueline, as you said, we could invite the parent in, maybe begin to talk something about the child. I don't know whether one could start with a story or one could start with something that happens in their world, and then ask a kind of engagement where the parent doesn't feel left out. Maybe the child has support from the parent to come in. So sometimes I think that now we might have to think of the screen having 3 or 4 people at a time, not just 2.
I think that's true. It's also, I think, knowing and understanding that every family, regardless of their background or what they have, knows their children, and that they have something to contribute to this conversation and to the growth and development of their child and of their family. And so for us, that baseline then holds the relationship, is that it's that we see ourselves as true partners with the family, and that our role is in understanding and trying to understand what their reality is and what they need, rather than, we're this school that knows something and has the answers. We actually don't have the answers. And at this time, the answers are right there in the home, because that's the only place they can exist. And so it's that reframing, and as what you're describing in terms of bringing more people into the session, I think it's both what's necessary and what you have available.
I think that's what I was referring to at the end of when I presented, because I think the opportunity here is very much about us being able to work in that sort of flexible, person-centered way. And we're, in a way, that's been our sort of philosophy for how we work. It's what we do, it's how we apply it, it's why we have so many different professionals from different backgrounds in the setting. Because different families need different things. And I guess in the UK, we have had all of our schools have been open. And so we gave the parents the choice to send the children in or to have them at home. And that's been mostly very good, apart from for these children who are more frightened to come in, but also won't engage with the online, and that's been a really major challenge. But I don't know, Minnie, whether you guys can do, whether it's possible, because we've also, for some, we've been doing some home visits, but of course there's much more sort of risk around infection, I guess, so you have to be quite mindful around that. But I don't know, and I don't know whether you've been doing that, Jacqueline, as well.
Going into the homes?
Yeah, going on home visits. We haven't done it very much, but we're definitely going to in the next phase more, and we have done it a little bit.
We're not there yet in our country. We're very much in still pretty strict isolation. We, in terms of what at least, I mean, I can't speak to the whole country, but I can speak to New York City. I mean, we are at the place in our city where people are now going outside and spending time in parks and playgrounds, but also at distance, and all adults, are wearing masks, or, theoretically wearing masks. I would say, probably here most are, which sounds a bit different, Minnie, from what you're experiencing in India. I think, so no, we haven't yet gone into people's homes. That's it. In a typical year, that's a large part of what September looks like and back to school, is getting to know each family in their individual context, building these relationships from the ground up. But we're going to have to find a new way actually this September to do that, because I suspect that we won't be able to physically go into people's homes.
I think the question, before we move on to more questions, I think this question that came either from a parent or from a therapist or from maybe a teacher, this question about parents seeing their kids upset, right? Regressed, irritable, having a very hard time is so upsetting to them. And of course, we know that parents are upset too. And you were talking about the psychic envelopes, all the circles around, each circle is trying to hold something while they are not feeling well, right? Nobody's feeling quite well. And I think that one of the things that we have to remind ourselves as mental health people, as clinicians, especially as a psychoanalyst, is that our work sometimes, or most of the time, is not to fix things, because we can't fix, we cannot really make the virus go. We can't fix the injustices of society. I mean, we can't fix so many things, but we can be present and hold and contain, right? Hold in our minds this upsetness and be there with the parents and the families, at least as, as Anna Alvarez would say, as life company, as someone who's there trying to think when you cannot think, or trying to hold something in mind when you cannot hold it in mind. And that's very hard, because it means that one has to accept one's own helplessness and own difficulty. And I think we are in this way, we are all in the same boat, and hopefully trying to think together as we are doing here. Let me ask you, and you, of course, you can, if you want to talk more, I mean, we are going, feel free to bring any question you have to each other. Don't feel that we have to go, but I was thinking, as we are talking about children being upset and parents being upset, and I know, Nell, at one point you brought up teachers and teachers not getting enough recognition. And there are a few questions here about teachers. Do teachers are stressed too? How can we help them? And then for teachers who are working in person now, how do they manage their own fears of getting COVID-19 when being with the children? Meaning, let's think about teachers for a moment. Let's think about what their task is, what you have observed in their task is, what can we think about them that could be helpful for them? Okay.
That's been definitely quite a theme for me over the last few months, because in the UK there's been every week people applaud the NHS staff, and then people started to say, what about other people? What about the people who take the bins out and these other jobs? And it has felt as if teachers have and educators have needed to adapt so much of their work to, you know, these whole kind of online models, and then managing children coming into school. And we're told that in school the teachers don't need to wear PPE, but in health settings they need to wear lots of PPE. And there's been a huge amount of anxiety in teachers, and also lots and lots of different government directives all the time saying, today you need to do this, today you need to write that risk assessment. And this has been relentless throughout the crisis, and teachers working through their holidays. And I do think that teachers are both really exhausted, and a bit like Jacqueline was saying, and then now it's September, you're supposed to have everybody back all of the time. And then there's the constant worry about another outbreak and outbreaks in your school and so on. So we try to bear that in mind as the people who are leading schools, but it's been a pressure for all of us as educators. In England, it's been a massive pressure for teachers.
Our teachers, as I'm sure yours, Nell, and teachers across the world are incredible, and have been asked to invent and reinvent themselves, their profession, their experience over this time. What I can say is that our teachers have done that with such intention and professionalism, and I'm continuously just impressed and grateful for every single one of our teachers. What I can say is that what we're experiencing is exactly this question, a fear about what it means to return to in-person schooling. For us now, there is a requirement for PPE for teachers, which also brings with it its own anxiety, which, you know, what does it mean to be in the classroom with your face covered like this and unable to show to children, unable to see your emotions, your experience. Like, so much of it, what I've been talking about, what we've all been talking about, is the connection and relationship to one another. And this real fear of becoming sick. I think here in New York, at least in our community, everybody knows somebody who's had COVID. Everybody knows somebody who's been very sick. And in many cases, you're just one step, if not directly related to death. And so it's not just a fear, but it's a reality. And so I don't have an answer to this, Talia, as to how we hold teachers through this, how we hold ourselves through this, because it's painful, and we can't make everyone feel better because we can't guarantee that everyone is going to be okay. I think that's part of what we're all holding right now.
One of the things that we have done is providing reflective space and supervision for teachers, which we do anyway. But again, the complication is that online that isn't the same as face-to-face, but it's something.
Right, the fear factor, right? I mean, there is the fear factor that is everywhere for everyone. And then there is how each one is asked to go about performing what they have always done, you know, children to learn and play, parents to parent and to work, teachers to teach, or educational institutions to, and it is all, you know, it is a constant trying to figure out how to do what you are supposed to do while experiencing all these fears, constant fears. Minnie, I'm wondering what's on your mind about that, and your experience there as an analyst.
I think that the teachers do reach out to the therapists, and they do talk about their anxieties. And I think that when we are working in schools, it's a teamwork. And I think that teachers do a fantastic job, and under very difficult circumstances. We haven't opened our schools yet, and I don't know when they will be open.
Right.
But I think you already have it in the West, but here it's a process that the parent teachers will need to learn, that the role of the analyst or the therapist is part of the child's growth and part of the capacity for the child to learn. Sometimes the capacity to learn is not there, or it has been arrested. And to see that this is a partner to help the learning as well.
Right, right. I think, yes, absolutely, because we are talking here about resilience, right? We are talking about how do we keep doing what we have to do, and what is it that we need to be able to do that. And what you are saying is support, support, support. And we cannot make fears go away. We cannot, you know, parents have to, it's hard to accept that my kid is not going to be happy-go-lucky through this time, or that parents are going to say, great, you know, I don't have a job, or I can barely work, I mean, with kids at home, and be happy about it. And teachers cannot, I mean, teachers, like everybody else, are really suffering and figuring out also not only how to do their profession, but how to keep themselves safe. So really, how do we accept that this is the reality, and these are the feelings that we are going to have to live with, you know, recognizing and accepting it, and then building support. I think this is what you're saying, and support is about understanding, right? Parents give their children the sense that they are supported when they understand them, and they understand them in a deep way. So understanding in a deep way is really sometimes our best way to help. I think, Minnie, that's what you were saying, and that's, Jacqueline, what you see happening in your institution.
Yeah, and I would,
yeah.
Oh,
no, go ahead.
I would just say that in many ways feels like an impossible task, both on the place of the teacher, who also many of whom have their own children at home, and they're struggling with their own family complexities as well, alongside this very real reality that we're talking through. And I think the ability for families to be attuned to their own child and their own children's needs right now is also very difficult when each person, each parent, each family is dealing with their own instability and struggle and anxiety. And so, yeah, I just think that, you know, we all in each of our contexts are helping to support families through this, through, you know, lots of different modes that we've all put into place to provide that support, and to know that it doesn't quite feel like that support is sufficient, at least yet.
Well, it's interesting that there is a question here. Well, two questions. One is moving from the teacher's roles to the parent's role, and what is the parent's role in homeschooling? And it's not unrelated. I know I'm putting it together, but I think it is in the context of us thinking about this virus as a kind of, you know, it's a natural disaster, right? Let's think about it, a kind of a natural disaster, a global natural disaster. So somebody's asking, what can we learn from other disruption to children's life from the past or present, such as war, famines, natural disasters? So it's interesting because putting it in that context of, I mean, it's interesting to think what, if one were to think what one learns, but also, you know, to think about what is it asking from teachers and parents. And, you know, I mean, obviously there are parents in the audience who are probably struggling. What is my role now? As this natural disaster is happening, and, you know, and I've never thought of it, because who can think about it when who can have predicted such a disaster?
This feels to me such an important question, because I feel that I've thought about that quite a lot, trying to keep the kind of hope and resilience, and what are we learning, and what can we adapt, and what can we take forward. But it's hard to sometimes stay hold of that because we're still in it. And whilst in the UK, as I said earlier, we're moving back towards, you know, there being more people in schools and more normality, there's always this thought that there could be another wave or another spike, or so I guess it's how to both think about what we might be learning, but also we're actually in it. We're in the thick of it, really. I saw one of the questions around mindfulness, and we have been doing mindfulness and well-being sessions with the children and with the staff and with the parents, and that has actually felt quite helpful, because we don't have control over where we're going, and we don't have the answers, but just providing that bit of space.
Providing some tools for parents to calm themselves down and calm their children down. And we know that, right, that we know that from very early on, children look to their parents to know, you know, this is the well-known attachment thinking about how the child look at the parent's face to know if he's safe or she's safe. And it's not in words, because you can say to a child, everything is okay, but your face might say something else. And the whole experience is saying something is wrong, right? Everything is saying something is wrong. and it's hard to say to the kid, everything is okay, don't worry, and for that to be believable. So really, how do you just accept it? And then how do you talk to children about it? I think there was a question about children right, this is an important thing. I mean, first of all, what are the consequences for children in the long term? I think you also brought it up, Nell, thinking about what this will do to children and to all of us in the long term, but specifically children. And how do we understand them? I think that understanding, helping not only mindfulness, but wondering about how are you communicating with parents? How can we communicate with parents to help them understand why is this, am I nuts? Is my kid nuts? Have we all lost our minds? How do we help them understand?
I find this idea that if you reassure, then the child's going to feel better is not always the case, because, as you say, they can read your face or they understand that that's not the case, and finding a way to talk about it with children, but I think not just with children, actually, with staff, with other people, so that you both acknowledge that it's not okay and that it's strange and that it's different, but with a sort of resilience that that you'll get through this and that we'll get through this together. Feels like that's been quite an important message to hold on to.
I was thinking that same thing, Nell, about the words we use, and how at this moment it really is a time for us to lean into our trust of our children, and knowing that kind of a blanket answer or a blanket response to provide comfort is actually not what anyone needs right now. Think about how you would feel if someone would get on the phone with you and say, oh, don't worry, Nell, everything's going to be fine. Like, actually that's not true, right? And so it's that same sense of openness and honesty that we need to bring to our conversations with children, and that we need to coach our families in having and offering with their children. While at the same time not wanting to instill or to perpetuate a cycle of fear and anxiety, but trying to thread the needle in a way that allows for access to truth and wondering, alongside a sense of knowing and where they fit into this, and how each family is taking steps and measures to keep each child or each family as safe as possible during this time. It's certainly a hard place to be at. I also am thinking back, Talia, to a question you said about what can we learn from, previous disasters. Our school itself is inspired by the schools of Reggio Emilia, which is a small town in northern Italy. I'm not sure if you know, or anyone in the audience knows about the town and the schools of Reggio Emilia. Just as a brief history, those schools were founded literally in the rubble after World War II. Loris Malaguzzi, who is the founder, and a group of parents literally built the schools out of the rubble, out of the destruction from World War II, as a way to bring children and families and teachers in partnership and relationship to heal, to come together, to receive connection after something terrible. And for us as a school that is already inspired by the values of these schools, it's a really good reminder for us around the experience that we're having now, and as a way to anchor into our roots as a community and as teachers and educators and partners in this work, that we will have a better tomorrow, that our tomorrow is going to be better than what we're experiencing, but it will also be founded in what we're experiencing today as we build that.
It reminds me, I mean, it reminds me two things that is connected to what you were saying, which is so important, Jacqueline, and the mission of Reggio Emilia, right? I've heard about this school, yes. One is this idea in psychoanalysis that unless you know the truth, you cannot, and there is both the external truth, the truth of reality and what is really happening, and the internal truth of what you cannot see or what you are experiencing. Unless you know the truth, you really cannot function. So you have to know the truth. And of course, probably parents all over are now asking, but how do you talk about the truth? And there are all kinds, it's a very interesting question. But the other thing, and maybe that's something else to think about, having enough context for parents to be helped to talk about the truth. But along with that, I was remembered that there was this well-known trauma expert, Bob Painos, who worked in many war zones with children. And he said many times that the worst often for children is not necessarily the traumatic event, but not having an adult who comforts them. And I think that can be a very reassuring thing for parents to know, that them as parents who can comfort their kids. And comfort doesn't mean denying reality, but saying, I'm here, we can cuddle, we can hug, we can say this is horrible, whatever, is really what kids need the most, having a comforting adult. So I was thinking about that.
That's also perhaps why at this time, sometimes our connection with the parents is so important, so that we can perhaps comfort them at some level, so they're able to comfort the children.
Yeah, I wonder actually, Minnie, your thoughts on that, or how you're thinking about reframing the work and the relationships that you're all engaged in right now.
The whole thing, Jacqueline, is we will have to think and invent new ways, because we can't work the way we were working. It's not going to be possible. And I don't think we're going to be open till November at least. The numbers are just rising here. It's nowhere near going down. So it's really what my team or all of us here are going to be able to have to think out, how we can create narratives for the parent and the child to be involved in. Maybe something that is interest. Many of the parents themselves are not educated well enough. Whether we can put something in where the parent might also be interested, and the parent can encourage the child, thereby the parent-child interaction, which is often very fragile, hopefully that could become a little stronger, and it may work in a way where we are working also with the parent-child relationship. So it's kind of having to think out again, Jacqueline, something which will be more multidimensional. It won't be strictly, what the strict analytical setting and boundaries are, because we can't work that anymore. Either we abandon what we are working at because we can't, or we don't let go and do what we can, maybe modify. So that's all a process we have to work out between ourselves.
I think.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
The relationship between the family is such an important one, because I think for all of us, or for all families, in the best of times, relationships are complicated. and particularly at a time like this where things are so fragile and fractured and complicated, the relationships are then even more that way. So I just appreciate the way you're thinking about that in terms of supporting the family's relationship with themselves, and what our role could be in supporting that.
Which really, it's interesting because one of the last question that was posted right now, which is a very meaty question, and I think is what you are talking about now, is how do we conceptualize the therapist in these adverse conditions? And I think, how do we conceptualize the parent? How do we conceptualize the teacher? I mean, this is what we are really talking. Everything is up in the air and we have to think. But with a therapist, how does a community conceptualize a therapist where families are vulnerable, basic needs are not met, and the community as a whole is feeling uncared for? So how do we as therapists create a space, help negotiate the absence of space when community feels thrown into a zone for their feared, for all, well, when you're right, we are in this horrible place. So I think this is it is a very big, important question, and really the thought that, meaning what you're saying is, we carry a space in our mind, if we use that word, that this question is, what is the space? And we have a space in our mind as therapists that we are carrying with us, and in that space we know that finding ways to talk about relationships and what is happening in the relationship is so central. But it's true, what place each one, we are all having to rethink what is our role and how do we go about functioning and continuing delivering whatever our mission is.
Maybe this time is a time when we're having these conversations, and that we're at the sort of beginning of something. So I'm just thinking about, after the wars and the work that happened that Bowlby did around attachment and so on, and that these kinds of major events, a bit like you were saying, Jacqueline, is that things do get built out of rubble and new ideas and new ways of working, and we're probably just at the beginning of some of that because we're still in it. But there's something really perhaps positive about that too.
I was just thinking, Nell, because you mentioned World War II, and from Melanie Klein's the narrative of an analysis. Well, she went off into the country, and Richard used to come to her home, and it's a textbook from which all of us are learning about the fantasies of a child and his relationships. So I think that if as therapists, okay, schools are closed, but if as therapists we just say a school is closed so we don't come anymore, it might really seem like a failure to the parents. Like, you picked us up when you wanted to. Did you need our children for you to work, or are you working for our children? So I think that it will be very important for us to continue to keep them in mind and to somehow reach out. Otherwise, it really might be a bit of fair weather work.
Maybe can I throw in one last question, because we are talking about the future and we don't have a lot of time left, but there has been a question about what are the consequences? What do we think this will do to children in the long term? And we can say to all of us, but let's think of, somebody there is very worried, and we are all very worried. Who is not very worried about what are the long-term consequences? And if any of you have thoughts about it, and of course, any thought?
I think it's going to be very different for different children. So because I think there are some children that will come out of it and they'll remember it. Obviously, we'll all remember it, but it won't have necessarily an adverse effect on them. And then there will be other children for whom it has a much more profound impact on their ability to cope. But it's such an unknown question right now.
I remember our last day in person in school. It was March 13th, and I was kind of standing in the stairway heading down, I don't know, to like wrap up a few last things, and I encountered a family, a parent, and as we were talking, we somehow ended up like in a very deep conversation in a stairwell, as I guess often happens, right? It's those moments in between things where things come up, and we ended up talking about in this moment, knowing that what we're all about to experience is something profound and something traumatic and something intense and something that we're all going to remember for the rest of our lives. I think this is the equivalent of what other generations have experienced, you know, with world wars or oppression, which actually still exists, and on and on and on of experiences. And so for us, I mean, it may be children being afraid of masks or fondly remembering masks, or an obsession that people have around washing hands and cleanliness and germs, or the idea of being indoors as a safe space and outdoors as a space of fear and worry. I mean, there are so many things that are happening, I think, particularly because of the extent of time that's going on. You know, it sounds like things in London or even in India are a bit more open than they are here. And so for us, children and families will have mostly been inside for 6 months at least. And what that then does to your brain, to your experience of inside and outside space.
Right, right. Yep. I mean, I cannot thank you. I mean, we could stay here for hours, right? I mean, there are so many great questions that we haven't even got to. And I cannot thank you enough and thank the audience enough for the great questions. And, you know, I hope they can forgive us for not being able to stay here for longer time to answer them and talk about it. I have to announce these upcoming webinars events. So before we say a final goodbye, the Friday 24th, a webinar, Neuroscientific Recommendations to Clinicians Practicing Psychoanalysis, and Sunday 26 on post-COVID-19, Robert Goisi, Stefano Bolognini, and Claudio Neri, and Jenny Vale. And you can find all of these at the ipa.world. And I think there is more announcements, right? You can find resources and information here at the website. You can look for it at the www.ipa.world. There are papers, articles, journals, recommendations for remote analysis, videos, guidance, and advice. Go to the IPA website. You have a lot of information, and much of it is free. You don't have to be a member. So please use it. And then we have a wonderful Congress coming ahead. We don't know if, we hope we can be there in person in July 2021 in Vancouver. The infantile, it's multiple dimensions, and the call for the proposal has been extended. And the deadline is now the 30th of August 2020, so people can still submit proposals. And we have 2 minutes to say goodbye. Maybe say a quick final word, each one of you. And I will say a quick word too in the 2 minutes. Minnie, would you have?
Yes. My thought is that as we go more and more online, really are we going to enter Huxley's Brave New World?
Nell?
I'd like to say that it's been really fantastic to have this conversation, an international conversation, and I wish we could talk more. Thank you.
Jacqueline?
I'm glad to hear, you know, the international perspective of how this is affecting all of us. And I might just go back to the analogy of the rebel and building something from that pain and trauma, and leave that as an opportunity for all of us to think about how and what it is we want to build and how we want to show up in this work.
And adding to that, to say goodbye, I think I hope we all feel that, as you said, Nell, we have not wasted a bad storm. You know, that this conversation has done exactly that. I really love that phrase, do not waste. Is it a bad storm or a good storm? And what is the word?
Never waste a good crisis.
Never waste a good crisis. Okay, I turn it into a storm. Thank you so very much, and thank you for the audience, and this has been really wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Talia.
Goodbye, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye.
Hello?